Well, shalom, dear friends, and welcome to this special video that we are making today regarding the sacred name of God. I've just noticed lately that a lot of the Bible scholars and teachers that are making YouTube videos are making a video about the sacred name of God. It's a subject that I think is of great interest in a lot of different religious groups, Christian and Jewish groups. And I also think there's a lot of misinformation kind of being circulated out there. So I wanted to throw my 2 cents in on this subject of the sacred name of God. Um, some of the aspects of this topic that are interesting to people is how the name should be pronounced. Is it Jehovah or Yehovah? Is it Yahweh or Yahweh? Um, should you use a substitute name for the sacred name of God, something like Lord, Adonai, or God, Elohim? Also, I think a lot of people are interested in what the name means. Depth of meaning of this name can really affect our relationship with God and enable us to worship Him and spend time in our devotions with Him in a kind of a deeper way, a more informed way. So I think the approach that I've taken to this video is not the most interesting and not the most pleasing to the eye. I've written a book lately. It hasn't been published yet. It's in the editing phase, but it should be published in the near future. But one of the chapters or portions of a chapter involves the sacred name of God. And basically, I tell you everything I've come to know and give you my opinions about how that subject should be handled. And the best way I could figure to make this video was to just go ahead and cut the portion of that book out of the book and paste it into a PowerPoint presentation. So my formatting for these PowerPoint slides is not always the best, but the content is here, and I hope the content is what you are interested in. So let's see what we can learn about the sacred name of God. That's the title of this portion of the book. And the Hebrew letters that you see adjacent to the section heading are the Hebrew letters Yud, He, Vav, He. And those are the consonants that make up the sacred name of God. The first time that sacred name appears in the biblical text is in the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 7, where the text reads, "The Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." Now, I read that from an English text of the Bible. This particular one is called the World Messianic Bible. I like that version because it uses the Hebrew names of the characters and also some Jewish Hebrew terminology that other English translations don't use. But the World Messianic Bible uses the same way of presenting the sacred name of God that most English versions do. They use the word Lord as a substitute for the actual name of God, but they capitalize all the letters. L-O-R-D are capitalized. Now, in most printed versions, the O-R-D parts of that word are in a smaller font. And in my book, they are in a smaller font, but when I pasted them into the PowerPoint presentation, it did not use the reduced size of those three letters. So we're just using all caps to represent that. That is a substitute for the name of God. That is not the actual sacred name of God. Then in Exodus 20, verse 7, which you may recognize as a portion of the Ten Commandments, one of the commandments in verse 7 is, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord, which is a representation of the sacred name, the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who misuses his name. The old King James Version says, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, which means to misuse it in a casual sense, kind of an empty, meaningless sense. Of course, using it in connection with profanity and stuff would all be condemned by this commandment. So we shall not misuse the name of the Lord our God. And that really needs to be our guiding principle as we go through the remainder of the teaching here in this video. We want to use or not use God's name in a way that he accepts and that's pleasing and to him and brings glory to him. We'll go into the history of how the name was represented in Scripture and how it was used by God's people at various points in history. At some point in Israel's history prior to 270 BCE, a substitute pronunciation for the sacred name of God began to be used. I use the date 270 BCE because that's a general time frame in which the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament, came into use. And the Septuagint used a substitute pronunciation for the name of God. This was done out of respect for God and fear of violating the commandment, which we just read, Exodus 20, verse 7, forbidding misuse of the sacred name. The substitute name or circumlocution chosen for this was the Hebrew title Adonai. So here it is in Hebrew letters, and here it is in a transliteration, Adonai. Adonai is actually a plural noun, a proper name kind of noun. And like the other title of God, Elohim, there is an allusion here, a hint here, of the three persons of the Trinity. If I would say Adoni, that would be a singular form of Lord, and the E ending would be a reference to me, so I would be saying my Lord. The I ending here is a reference to a plurality of people being my personal Lord. I guess literally it should be lords, and Elohim should be gods. But again, that is not the approach the Bible uses, but it is one of the areas where the Bible teaches the plurality of persons in the Godhead. So Adonai means my Lord, and that was a substitute for sacred name. Occasionally, when the word Adonai appeared in the Bible contiguous to the sacred name, what that means is if you have two names of God side by side, and the first one is Adonai, but the second one is the sacred name, then you wouldn't want to say Adonai twice. You wouldn't want to say Adonai and then the substitute Adonai. You would want to say Adonai, but then as we go on to learn here, you would use another substitute. So when the word Adonai appeared in the Bible, contiguous to the sacred name, Adonai would be pronounced normally, and the circumlocution used instead of the sacred name was God or Elohim in the Hebrew, and here's the transliteration. As I mentioned before, Elohim is actually a plural noun, hinting at the multiplicity of persons in the Trinity. Whoops. Then I go on to explain the use of 270 BCE. It's a significant time because that's the approximate date of the translation and publication of the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Tanakh or Old Testament. The Septuagint utilized a substitute name, Kurios. Kurios is the Greek version of Adonai. And so Kurios is how it's presented in the Greek version of Exodus 27 and other places where the sacred name appears. in passages where Adonai appeared in the text. This demonstrates that by the time of the Septuagint, the practice of using a circumlocution for the sacred name was already in widespread use. So I would say the use of a substitution started somewhere probably between the return from the Babylonian exile, which would be about 536 or so BC up to 270 BC. Somewhere in that time frame is where the substitution started to be used. So on the other hand, the other side of that coin is before that time, like from the Garden of Eden until the return from the Babylonian exile, the sacred name of God was spoken. It was utilized to address God and in times of prayer. The scriptures that were written within that time frame wrote the sacred name of God was in writing in those texts, and it was undoubtedly pronounced as it was written, as people understood that it should be pronounced in those texts. So the substitution principle occurred later in the Old Testament history, but by the time the Savior, Jesus, Yeshua, comes around, that practice of circumlocution was being used in the New Testament era, and we'll see later in this teaching that the use of a circumlocution was common and was used in the New Testament documents. Just to be clear, the reason for the circumlocution was that when people read this commandment not to misuse the name of the Lord your God, they felt like in order to avoid accidentally taking the name of the Lord in vain or misusing his name, we just won't say it at all. And that will protect us from an accidental or inadvertent misuse of his name. So that's when the use of circumlocutions came into practice. And after that time, among probably most Jewish communities, the idea of saying God's name out loud would be blasphemous. Some Jewish people, some Jewish scholars would claim that we don't really know how God's name was pronounced. So because we don't know how it was pronounced, then we shouldn't pronounce it at all because we might get it wrong. The irony of that is that when you use a substitute and you pronounce that substitutionary name, you know that name is wrong because you've intentionally used a name for God that is not the sacred name in its place. So you're using a name that you know is wrong for that. But it's done to protect people from inadvertently misusing or taking God's name in vain. Okay, let's continue on. Prior to the publication of the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Old Testament, let me disappear my picture here so I can read the text. The Masoretic text of the Hebrew Old Testament began to appear in print between the 7th and 10th centuries of the Common Era, or some of us prefer AD instead of CE, Anno Domini, the years of our Lord. So it wasn't until the 7th century of the New Covenant era that the Hebrew text of the Bible appeared with vowels. Prior to that time, it was written without vowels. So prior to the publication of the Masoretic text, virtually all Hebrew manuscripts of the Bible were written without vowels. This does not suggest that vowels didn't exist in the biblical language, only that they were not written in manuscripts. And we know that people were aware of vowels and they were using vowels in their speech because theological arguments from that time frame, actually throughout the biblical era, were made in which doctrinal assertions based on vowels implied in the Hebrew text were made to prove a point. So even though the vowels weren't written in the biblical text, everybody who read that text knew that there were vowels, and they knew for pretty certain what those vowels were and made arguments on the basis of that. The reason for the textual absence of vowels may be, as some scholars suggest, that writing materials were so valuable that a vowel-less text saved space in these precious manuscripts. And that is certainly true. The writing materials were very valuable, and leaving the vowels out saved space, and that may be the only reason that there were no vowels in the text. But I think a better explanation is that the vowels were not and are not needed to communicate clearly and with great technical accuracy for readers who are familiar with the Hebrew language. In modern-day Israel, nearly all documents, newspapers, magazines, road signs, virtually everything, menus, are written in modern Hebrew and do not have vowels in the text. I have studied modern Hebrew, and I have become familiar enough with the Hebrew language that I can read a vowelless text, a consonantal text with no problem. If you're an English speaker, you can do the same thing with the English language. You can write sentences, paragraphs with no vowels, and hand that over to somebody who speaks English, and they will be able to easily figure out what you have written there. The reason the Masoretes included vowels and accents in their Hebrew texts was for the benefit of those readers who were not familiar with the Hebrew language, such as students and scholars from other cultures. And I know as a student of Hebrew when I was starting out, although the vowel system can be kind of confusing and a little bit overwhelming to somebody who's not familiar with it, it is a great blessing and benefit for those who are trying to learn the language, especially how to pronounce it. Furthermore, in the days of the Masoretes, the Hebrew language had fallen into disuse and was only familiar to readers of the Hebrew Bible and students of Jewish religious literature. So the vowel points also served to normalize pronunciation of the language. In our era, the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible serves as the standard scholarly text of the Hebrew Bible. Scholars use either the Stuttgartensia or the Leningrad Codex, but both of those are Masoretic texts of the Hebrew Bible. So it is the standard, and it's a great one. It's a fantastic edition of the Hebrew Old Testament. Let me disappear my picture again here. Maybe I'll just leave it turned off. You don't need to look at me. The manner in which the substitution of Adonai or Elohim for the sacred name was reflected in the ancient text was by a constant awareness that when the tetragrammaton, which is the 4 letters of the sacred name of God, I think that's a Latin term. Scholars like to throw that around because it makes them sound smart. So when the tetragrammaton, those 4 consonants that we have talked about, appeared in the text, the name would not be vocalized, but an appropriate substitute of Adonai or Elohim would be spoken. The Septuagint only printed the substitution, kurios, which means Lord, or theos, which means God, in their text. So the Greek version didn't even give you the consonants of the sacred name. It just only provided you with the substitute, with the circumlocution. The drawback to this is in the Old Testament, when you come across the name or the title kurios or theos, you don't know whether the sacred name is being used or not. So you can't tell. The same is true of the New Testament documents, which at least the Greek version of those, which followed the same practice. When the Masoretic text came into use, readers were blessed by the convenience of a text with vowels. However, this is also a cause of controversy over the proper pronunciation of the name, as we'll get into a little bit later. In more modern times, another circumlocution, which is Hashem, Hebrew expression, the Ha means the, and Shem means name. So this Hashem means the name, and that's used instead. I have a Jewish prayer book, or a Siddur, that is both English and Hebrew, which is a lot of fun if you're trying to learn the Hebrew language. Makes it a lot easier to have an English side by side. And in the English side, whenever the sacred name is used, that prayer book substitutes Hashem. So that is kind of a modern thing. In antiquity, it was always Adonai or Elohim, but in modern times, it can be Hashem. I also have a electronic version of that same Siddur, and in the English version, the electronic version gives you the option of choosing either Adonai or Hashem for your English reading. Since the vowels for only the circumlocutions appear in the Masoretic text, there is some doubt regarding how that name was pronounced. In other words, all the other words in the Masoretic text have the appropriate vowels, so you know how to pronounce those words. But when it comes to the sacred name, it's the vowels for another word, either Adonai or Elohim. So the Masoretes don't really guide us in how that sacred name was pronounced, because they thought it shouldn't be pronounced. So the resultant vocalization is the, I'm sorry, let me start over here. Some more recent scholars have suggested that the consonants for the sacred name should be pronounced as the vowels that appear in the Masoretic text, and that the resultant vocalization is the actual pronunciation of God's sacred name as revealed in Scripture. That resultant pronunciation is Yehovah. Yehovah. English speakers have exchanged the Hebrew Y sound in Yehovah for a J sound, as they do with so many other Hebrew names. Like Jesus in Hebrew is Yeshua, starts with a Y. English speakers substituted J for the Y sound, and Jesus comes out. The result is, in English, would be Jehovah. That's where the term Jehovah comes from. The problem with this is that Jehovah is not even a Hebrew word, and so is a meaningless mix of consonants, the consonants for the sacred name, and vowels, the vowels of one of the two substitutes of two distinct words. So the consonants and the vowels are for two different words. So that is undoubtedly, so Jehovah or Yehovah is undoubtedly not the intended divinely revealed name of God. Furthermore, those who propose that Yehovah is, or Jehovah is the correct pronunciation do not take into consideration that when the biblical text uses Adonai and the sacred name contiguously, as we talked about before, if Adonai and sacred name appear side by side, the circumlocution changes to what appears right here on the screen. So here we have Yud-He, Vav-He, the four consonants of the sacred name, but the vowels here are a variant of the vowel segal, which is an E sound. This is a segolet shva. We have a holum up here between the he and the vav. The vav has a hirek underneath it, and these are the vowels for Elohim. The consonants are not for Elohim. The vowels are for Elohim, and the consonants are for the sacred name of God, which is the generic title of God. However, if the printed consonants and the vowels are pronounced for this representation, the one we just talked about, it results in Yehovah, or English, Jehovah. and no reputable scholar suggests that this is a legitimate pronunciation of God's sacred name. I want to make mention to you of a scholar who is well represented on YouTube and on the internet. He is actually a brilliant scholar. I believe his degree is from Hebrew University, which is legitimate as it gets. But he also has made videos regarding the sacred name. And his name is Nehemiah Gordon. I encourage you to go to his website. You can learn a lot of great insights from him. But one area where I disagree with Nehemiah is that he is one of those who believes that the vowels as they appear in the sacred text do represent the actual sacred name of God. So he would call him Yehovah. He believes that is the correct pronunciation of the sacred name of God. I have seen his videos where he represents that. I can't recall whether he acknowledges an awareness of this idea of circumlocutions or whether he doesn't. I don't want to speak for him on that, but I just want to put him out there as an example of a very reputable scholar who believes that the sacred name of God should be pronounced Yehovah. I'm also going to refer to him a little bit later when we talk about the subject of how the third letter in the Tetragrammaton, the Vav, should be pronounced. Should it be pronounced as a V or a W? And there, I think Nehemiah is right, and he gives a very strong and powerful argument in favor of that. So check out Nehemiah and see what you think about this subject that he teaches about, and also other subjects that he teaches on in a very scholarly way. Some of those who hold to the Yehovah theory, and I believe Nehemiah is one of those, suggest that the name is not meaningless, but describes God as he who was, is, and is to come, as in Revelation 4:8 and 11:17. The theory is that parts of these words put together results in Yehovah. Now, in my book, I capitalized some of the letters in this Hebrew expression right here. Not capitalized, but I put them in bold print. But on my my PowerPoint presentation, my bold print doesn't stand out. So I'm going to have to point out to you where the bold print should be. This expression in Hebrew, in English, it's he who was, is, and is to come. So in Hebrew, we have Yehiyeh, Hoveh, Chaya. Yehiyeh, well, let's take them in reverse order because that will make more sense with our English. Chaya is what is called a perfect Hebrew tense, which usually is a reference to past time, but the context determines the time. A perfect verb, a perfect form verb is a completed action verb. So in English, this would be he was. Hoveh is like a participial form of that same verb, the verb of being, haya, and a participial form implies a incomplete action or an ongoing action, again without reference to time, but a participial would usually be translated by an English word with an ing on the end. So it would be he who is being. So he's in the process of being. And that is usually a reference to present time. Then the Yehiyeh is what we call in Hebrew an imperfect verb, which often implies the future, as it does here, but the context of the use of these perfects and imperfects really has to be dependent on to tell the time. So Yehiyeh would be saying he will be, again using the verb of being. Now, If you take the bold print letters, which you can't tell, but which I'm going to point out to you, the first is Yod, the second is Hey, or the H sound, the third is the V, the Vav, or the V sound, and then the final H here is in bold print, and that is the final Hey in the sacred name, Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. The bold letters in my example highlight the consonants of the sacred name, making him the one who existed in the past, is currently present, and will be in the future. However, this expression, Yehwa v'chaya, is unknown in the Old Testament, and so would have been scripturally meaningless to those who lived in the era. In addition to those passages, in those passages in Revelation that we mentioned before, Revelation 4:8 and 11:17, um, all in the places in Revelation where that expression is used, isn't used in the way that we've been talking about. It's used in the way that it is represented here. And this would involve Hebrew translations of the New Testament, usually into a modern or biblical era Hebrew translated from the Greek New Testament. So, of course, the Greek New Testament is not going to present this, but a Hebrew translation of that Greek Testament always represents it in this way. And the verbs are Haya, Ve'Hoveh, Ve'Yavo. So Haya, this is the same as that. Ve'Hoveh is the same as that, only it has the conjunction and attached to it. And then the third one also has a vav, or an and conjunction attached to the word, and it's yavo, using a bait here instead of yihye. So bo in Hebrew means to come. So he is the one who will be coming in the future. And that seems to be the way it's always represented, but that is in translation. And of course, this expression is very different from those proposed by the Jehovists. And what I've written up here is kind of in reverse order. This is future, present, and past. This is past, present, and future. Okay, we go to a couple of other Bible passages that are significant for our studies. The first one is in Exodus 3:13. And the context for this Bible passage is Moses meeting with God on Mount Sinai, or Mount Horeb, for the first time. This is in conjunction with the burning bush, which attracted Moses to the top of the mountain. And it's there that God reveals to Moses that he has chosen Moses to return to Egypt and lead the people in the Exodus to their freedom and ultimately into the promised land. And Moses is not eager to do that because he was born in Egypt, grew up in Egypt, had some bad experiences in Egypt, and had to escape to survive, and fled to the land of Midian, where he eventually met God on Mount Sinai, which the Bible says is in Midian, not in the Sinai Peninsula, but in Midian. So in this meeting, one of the questions, and I think these are challenging questions that Moses puts to God, because he doesn't really want to do this. So Moses said to God, "Behold, when I come to the children of Israel and tell them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am." That, of course, is the English version of it. And from the World Messianic Bible, it uses the term who in the middle of the I ams, where the King James Version, and I think the New King James Version, render this I am that I am. I am who I am is correct, but I think we're just accustomed to I am. And their Hebrew for that is Ehyeh, asher Ehyeh. And he said, you shall tell the children of Israel that I am, Ehyeh, has sent me to you. Now, this word Ehyeh has significance. It has, it utilizes the same root word as the sacred name of God uses. God said to, moreover to Moses, you shall tell the children of Israel this, the Lord. And then he gives the sacred name here. So the Lord is the substitution, remember. But God undoubtedly actually spoke the sacred name as it should be pronounced. So the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is my memorial to all generations. So this word, I am, is related to the sacred name by using the same root word. This is the sacred name itself. Now, if the Jehovah speculations do not render a true representation of the pronunciation and meaning of the sacred name, then what saith Scripture? In Exodus 3, verses 13 through 15 are going to give us, which we just read, are going to give us some insight into the meaning of the sacred name that is given, and also provides partial guidelines to correct pronunciation. In this narrative, Moses inquires of God regarding the divine name. This was for the purpose of enabling Moses to reveal the name of God to the Israelites enslaved in Egypt. God responded, I am that I am, or in Hebrew, Ehyeh asher Ehyeh. You shall tell the children of Israel this, I am, or Ehyeh, has sent me to you. Here, God gives a version of the sacred name by saying that he is Ehyeh, which is literally I am. This does scripturally tie the sacred name of God to the Hebrew verb of being, hayah. So in Ehyeh, we have an aleph attached to the front so it would be a prefix of the verb of being, and it just makes it an imperfect form. So instead of saying he was, adding the aleph prefix means I am, and it changes it into a continuous action verb. This form of the verb, which God utilizes to reveal himself in his name, is a first-person masculine singular kal form. The word kal in Hebrew just means simple, or the most basic form. Imperfect verbs imply continuous action rather than completed action. So the meaning of I am could be more accurately rendered, I always have been, am now, and always will be, the eternally existent one. Technically, excuse me, technically, God is the only one who could faithfully and accurately speak this form of the sacred name. If Moses had spoken this name, Ehyeh, to the Hebrews, he would have been implying, I, Moses, am that I am. Therefore, God gave Moses a third-person masculine singular imperfect hifil form. This form of Hebrew verbs is a causal form of his name. And here it is, the sacred name. I have purposely omitted the vowels from this rendering of the sacred name because the Masoretic text does not supply them. It only supplies the circumlocution. And because the determination of exactly which vowels were originally revealed will determine not only the pronunciation of the sacred name, but also its meaning. So we're looking at a vowelless text representation of the sacred name. When I state that the Masoretes consistently substituted the vowels of other Hebrew names, Adonai or Elohim, for the purpose of pronunciation of the sacred name, I must admit that they did not do this completely. So what were the areas where they did not do that? Throughout the Old Testament, the text utilizes shortened or abbreviated forms of the sacred name. For example, in Psalm 15, verse 2, the sacred name is given in this form. Yah is how that would be pronounced. And notice that it has a vowel and also a symbol called I can't remember what that dot in the middle of the hey is. But the important thing we want to look at is the vowel that is provided in the Masoretic text. That is going to be an authentic vowel. We know that the vowel kametz that appears here, it's the T-shaped vowel beneath the first consonant, we know is authentic, divinely revealed vowel pronunciation because it does not match the circumlocution vowels of either Adonai or Elohim. Obviously, the consonants which appear here are the first two consonants of the Tetragrammaton, or the sacred name. Therefore, the name given here is the first of two syllables of the sacred name. The pronunciation is Yah. Sometimes, when an abbreviated form of a name is expanded to the full form, in other words, instead of just one symbol, you have both syllables, a subtle change can happen in the first vowel. If it changes by lengthening the name, it will change to a vowel of the same class, but will either become either a long or short form of that vowel. When I talk about classes of vowels, in English, the vowels are A, E, I, O, and U. But even in English, we have long and short variations of each of those. We have long and short A's, we have long and short I's, we have long and short O's, etc. Same is true of Hebrew. So if the vowel in the shortened form is going to change, it's going to change to a verb of the same class. Our example of the T-shaped kametz, which is called kametz, is a long form of an A-class vowel. The short form of the A-class vowel looks like this. That is called a patach. It appears below the letter that is indicated. It's pronounced in pretty much the same way as the long vowel, as the kametz, but in the text it would appear as a patach in the lengthened form. So it's called patach. If the vowel that God intended is kametz, it matches the first person form and the shortened form of Yah. So the vowel in the sacred name may be a kametz, which would be pronounced ah, or it may be changed to a patach, which would also be pronounced ah. Now, I think some scholars would say there is a subtle difference in pronunciation, and I have heard those variations that I can't tell the difference. So I don't know if God can or not. This would make the third person form of the sacred name a kal, or simple action form, indicating simple existence. However, if an A-class kametz changes to a short form patach, this would make a hifil form, a causal action form, implying that the divine names means that God not only exists, but that he is the cause of his own existence and the cause of all other things that exist. Most scholars who are sufficiently studied to assert opinions on this question indicate that they believe that the divine name was revealed in the hifil form. This is supported by the fact that the paradigm for hifil verb forms exactly matches this arrangement. Because we have the first syllable of the divine name complete with vowels provided for us by the Masoretic text, as well as the last two consonants, the vav and the final hey, we need to discover only the vowels of the last syllable. God has provided this for us by revealing the first person singular form of his name when he gave it as Yehwa in the first person singular, complete with original Masoretic vowels. So we have all the vowels here, including this one in the second syllable. Therefore, the final vowel in the sacred name is a segol, the triangular-shaped group of dots under the penultimate consonant, which is pronounced as an E sound. And here it is right here, kind of a group of three dots in a triangle shape. And that is an E class verb. One will also notice that when going from first person form of the name, Yehwa, to the third person version of the name, which is, I guess I can go ahead and pronounce it here because we've already provided all the vowels, which is Yahweh. The penultimate consonant changes from a yod, as here, the third consonant is a yod. It changes to a vav, which is shown here. This is a normal alteration between these two related consonants, especially when going from first person to third person. And in the paradigms in the charts for the Hifil form, the Hifil form of the verb of being does change. The third consonant changes to a vav from a yod. Also, an additional vowel, which is indicated here, it looks like a colon underneath the vowel. It's right here in the sacred name. It's called a shva, and it appears under the second consonant. The shva is not pronounced and only indicates that the first syllable is a closed syllable, which I could say more about, but I choose not to at this point. One final etymological issue must be addressed before coming to any conclusion about the pronunciation of the sacred name. There's a very popular theory that in the biblical era, the penultimate consonant, the vav in the sacred name, the third consonant, which I referred to as a vav and is pronounced as a V sound, was actually called wow and was pronounced as a W in the biblical era, in antiquity. So in modern Hebrew, the vav is called a vav and it's pronounced as a V. But a lot of scholars say that in the biblical era, centuries and centuries ago, millennia ago, that consonant was called a wow and was pronounced as a W. If this is the case, then the sacred name would be pronounced Yahweh. And you have probably heard it pronounced that way because the majority of scholars believe that that's the way it was pronounced in the biblical era. And they would say that's the proper pronunciation even today, that the modern Hebrew way of pronouncing it is wrong. So I have taken Hebrew in my seminary training, in my graduate studies. My doctorate is in biblical languages. So I have taken, I don't know how many Hebrew grammar books on my bookshelves. And all of the Hebrew grammar books that I have indicate that in antiquity, the vav was actually a wa and was pronounced, the vav was actually a wow and it was pronounced as a W instead of a V. In addition to that, I have studied Hebrew online. I took the Hebrew University Biblical Languages course online, and they use the modern pronunciation. And I can't remember whether they say that in antiquity it was pronounced as a wow W or not. So I can't remember what their view is. I have also done online studies with with two Messianic rabbis, and I think both of them. I know the one that I'm studying with now says that it was in antiquity pronounced as a W, as a wa sound, and when he pronounces the vav in the text of other words, he always uses the W. So that is the almost universally accepted viewpoint. This theory that the vav was actually a wow and was pronounced as a W derives from a study of the culturally and geographically related ancient languages of Ugaritic, Aramaic, Phoenician, and some other languages that were geographically close to the Promised Land, and even Arabic. The trouble with this theory is that the reason we don't know how the Vav was pronounced in Hebrew is that we don't have any people from the biblical era to inform us as to how the letter Vav was pronounced in that era. So in other words, because we don't have, somebody like Peter, James, or John to tell us how the Vav or the Wow was pronounced in their day and age, we can't hear it with our ears, and so we don't know how it was pronounced. But if that is true of Hebrew, it's also true of these related languages, Ugaritic, Aramaic, Phoenician, and even Arabic. They may have a letter that is identical to the Hebrew Vav, but we don't know how it was pronounced in antiquity in those languages either. The other factor is that all of those related languages were influenced by Arabic, and Arabic is the language that is spoken in those territories today. Modern Arabic does pronounce the vav as a wow sound, and that fact, the modern pronunciation of Arabic, which influenced all those other languages, is taken to be, by modern scholars, it's taken to be the way that the Vav type letter was pronounced in antiquity for Hebrew and all the other languages. So that's the assumption based on a modern pronunciation of those languages. There's something that I did not include in my book, and I haven't included it in the PowerPoint presentation either, but I do want to talk a little bit about it now. We've already talked about the Septuagint, which was a Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. And in the Greek translation, the Septuagint translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, words in Hebrew with a vav, particularly names. Let me use the example of the name David or David. That is spelled, the middle consonant of David is a vav in Hebrew. But when it's translated into the Greek, it comes out Dawid with a W sound. So scholars have referred to that, and they say, because we know how ancient Greek was pronounced, and we know that as well as we know it for any other languages. But because the Greek translates the vav in David's name as a wow or a W sound, then that theory about the wow must be correct. But the flaw in that theory is that Greek doesn't have a V sound. So there's no Greek sound V with which to translate that V from the Hebrew text in the Greek language. So at a latter time, and some scholars say that this practice in the Greek language was in effect in the New Testament era. There was a way of taking the Greek letter B, which is called a beta, and pronouncing it as a V, like the Hebrew does. The Hebrew letter bait, which is the B, can also be pronounced as a V, as a V sound. And whether or not that bait has a dagesh or a dot in the middle determines whether it should be pronounced as a B or a V. And we'll talk more about that later. Well, apparently the Greek was the same way, that there is a way you could present a beta in a text that would provide you with a V sound. But the Greek of the Old Testament and apparently even the Greek of other writings other than biblical writings of the first century does not utilize that secondary use of the bait. So if you depend on the Greek New Testament documents to determine how to pronounce not only the sacred name of God, which you can't tell because kurios is always used, but how to pronounce other Hebrew V sounds, you just you can't tell from the Greek because there is no V sound in the Greek that was used to translate the biblical documents. Okay. Oh, let's see here. It slipped up. On the other hand, we have communities of Jews, like living with us today, who after their expulsion from Israel in 70 CE, I said they're living with us today. In antiquity, their ancestors were expelled from Israel in 70 CE and became two distinct groups, both preserving the ancient language of Hebrew and its pronunciation. The Sephardic Jews settled in Spain. So they left Israel and settled in Spain. But after their expulsion from there, from Spain in the 15th century CE, which would be around 1492, the time Columbus left Spain for the New World. Some have speculated that because of this, he saw the handwriting on the wall, and some think that he populated his crew with Jews to rescue them from expulsion from Spain. Some say he was Jewish himself, or he was at least sympathetic to the Jewish cause. But anyway, these Jews who lived in Spain for many centuries were expelled from there in the 15th century, and they settled in many areas around the Mediterranean Sea and throughout the Middle East. So in the Mediterranean area of the Eastern Hemisphere and in Middle Eastern areas, the Jews who populated those areas were called Sephardic Jews. Sephard is the Hebrew word for Spanish, but remember they were expelled from there. So all of those Jews spoke Hebrew in what is called a Sephardic dialect. So that's one population of Jewish people, and they live not only in Spain, but in the regions surrounding the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern countries, like the Promised Land. Some of them were able to come back to the Promised Land, which was then called Palestine. Some of them settled in, Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and modern-day Jordan and places like that. The other group is called the Ashkenazi Jews, and they settled in Eastern and Central Europe. These were also scattered by persecution to many different regions, although there are some subtle variations in how these two groups, the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi Jews, pronounce Hebrew, mainly due to the influence of Yiddish among the Ashkenazim. Yiddish is kind of a combination of Hebrew and German or Germanic languages among the Ashkenazi. Both groups pronounce the Vav as a V sound. Neither of those groups that are in existence today use the wa, call the letter wa or use the W sound. Modern Hebrew has followed the Sephardic pronunciation with some concessions to Ashkenazi. Therefore, modern Hebrew calls it vav and pronounces it as a V. Now, if you're going to say, on the one hand, that the Arabic influence of the ancient languages of Ugaritic and Aramaic and so forth is an accurate representation of how the vav was pronounced in those languages in antiquity, and it has faithfully been transmitted through the generations until today in those areas where those languages are spoken, you should be consistent and say that the Sephardic Jews and the Ashkenazi Jews living in separate geographical regions have also faithfully preserved the accurate pronunciation of the Hebrew language from the time of their exile in biblical antiquity, and that it's been preserved today. And the fact that they are two distinct and separate groups, the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic, and that when you compare their pronunciation of the language, it's nearly identical with some variations. You should also then say that that is an accurate representation of how Hebrew was pronounced in the biblical era, and that it's the same as it is pronounced today. More importantly, I believe that the Vav identity and the V pronunciation can be vindicated from Scripture. And I think this is more important than all of the other comparative language conclusions, because I think the Bible itself can solve this problem for us. There are a few words used in the Bible that can be spelled two or more different ways, but are pronounced in the same way. And here's an example. And by the way, this argument is an argument that I heard first from Nehemiah Gordon, who we referred to earlier. I think Nehemiah is exactly right about the pronunciation of the V. So there's a V in Jehovah, and he pronounces it as a V. Yehovah. He doesn't pronounce it Yehovah. He pronounces it Yehovah. And this is his argument, but since I heard it from him, I've heard it from numerous other scholars, and I believe that this is the best way of determining how the Vav was pronounced. The Hebrew word for back, relating to the anatomy of the human body and various derived meanings, can be spelled in two ways, as represented here. This is Gimel, Vav, and this is Gimel, Beit. We talked a little bit about this with the Greek language, but now we're going to talk about this phenomenon in the Hebrew language. The first consonant in these two examples is Gimel. Here's a Gimel, there's a Gimel. And it's pronounced G in both words. The second example is the second consonant in the first example, the left one, is a Vav. Here's a Vav, and it's the same consonant as the third consonant in the sacred name. The second consonant in the second example, the right one, is a Vet, and is pronounced as a V. Now, if this is the letter Beit, or the B, and if it had a dagesh or a dot in the middle, it would be pronounced as a strong B sound. But because there's no dot or dagesh here, it is pronounced as a V sound. It's called vet. There's no question about the pronunciation of the vet. There's no question about this, because the Masoretes have provided us with vowels for this, for this word and for this letter, not substitutes. So there's no question about the pronunciation of the vet in either modern or ancient Hebrew, because both words are pronounced the same, gav, The Vav must have been pronounced in the biblical era as a V and not a W. I hope you followed that, because I do think that's the strongest argument for how the ancient Hebrew Vav was pronounced. We now have sufficient knowledge of the meaning of the sacred name, he who is the eternal cause of all existence, including his own. We also have sufficient knowledge of the vowels and consonants of the sacred name to be confident that it was written like this, with a patak and a segol vowels, and was pronounced Yahweh. One matter still remains regarding the sacred name. If we know that the sacred name of God, Yahweh, was given by God as Holy Scripture so that it could be known and used, and if we know that the reluctance to pronounce the sacred name was a human innovation which occurred some 1,200 years after the name was first revealed in Scripture, understood, and spoken, should this practice of circumlocution continue? Some would argue it should not, that if we do know how the sacred name is pronounced, God will be offended if we pronounce it any other way. That would be a vain use of his name. Is it pleasing to God to pronounce his name in certain circumstances? And most people would agree that those circumstances would be worship, prayer, reading the scriptures, etc. Certain factors must be considered in coming to any conclusion. The New Testament documents may well have been written originally in Hebrew and later translated into Greek. And I believe that is the case, and I believe I've seen some evidence for that. Even if, by the way, if you're interested in the subject of New Testament documents being written first in Hebrew, I made a video on that, and I think there's a playlist I've even started called Hebrew New Testament or something like that. So it goes into the evidence from the patriarchs who said that the New Testament documents were first written in Hebrew and later translated into Greek. And I think in two manuscripts, Hebrew manuscripts of the book of Matthew. One is called the Sebastian Munster version of Hebrew Matthew. The other is called the Dutilit version of Hebrew Matthew. I think we may have the authentic thing. Now, Munster and Dutilit were not written by the hand of Matthew. I'm sure that is the case. But they may have been the end product of many copies and recopies of the document that Matthew eventually wrote. And in my video, I go into the rationale, the reason why I believe those are the two best ones. And of the two, I believe Munster is the best one. The New Testament documents may well have been written originally in Hebrew and later translated into Greek. Even if the New Testament documents in Hebrew were available, it's doubtful they would have been written with vowels. The Dead Sea Scrolls were written in Hebrew in that same era, and they do not utilize vowels. Therefore, vowelless renderings of the sacred name would probably not provide confidence in proper pronunciation. The Greek texts of the New Testament are much more significant in addressing this question. The New Testament writers naturally quoted from the Greek Septuagint when citing Old Testament passages. Those citations, which bore the sacred name, in those citations, in other words, in the Old Testament passages that included the sacred name, they followed the Septuagint example of using the circumlocution kurios, which is the same as the Hebrew Adonai, meaning Lord. Whenever English Bibles utilize this circumlocution, the rendering is Lord, but all caps with smaller second, third, and fourth. letters. Now, what I'm getting at here is that if you are convinced that you know how to pronounce the name of God and you know the meaning of God's sacred name, should you use it in practice? Well, the best answer we can get to that question comes to us from Jesus himself and the apostles. And the Hebrew or the Greek New Testament documents that record for us the words that Jesus spoke and the words that the apostles spoke and then recorded in Scripture. And the practice of using a circumlocution for the sacred name of God not only was begun with not only was utilized with the Septuagint, but it was also used in the New Testament documents. So in writing the New Testament documents, the authors of the apostolic authors of Scripture did not use the sacred name. They did not spell it out with Greek letters, so it could be pronounced with Greek letters. And one of the reasons for that may be that there was no V sound in the Greek that they were using. So the practice of using circumlocutions was not only prominent in the Old Testament era with reference to the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament era. The New Testament documents continue to use a circumlocution. Therefore, although I believe that the sacred name can be understood and spoken, the New Testament's use of circumlocutions was continued in the Second Temple era and even until contemporary time. This being the case, I believe that it is appropriate to pronounce the sacred name of God, Yahweh, especially when reading the scriptures, praying, or in worship. And that is the practice that most English Bibles use, but there are some. And the World English Bible is one that uses Yahweh. I know there are some other ones. I believe the New Jerusalem Bible, which is actually a Catholic Bible, I believe that uses Yahweh also, only it spells it with a W, which most scholars believe is correct. So there are some Bibles that spell out the sacred name Yahweh in English characters, and you can pronounce it that way, or Yahweh. I think the best solution to this dilemma is to let your conscience be your guide. However, thought should be given to potential offense that could be taken by others who may be convinced that the sacred name should never be spoken. And the most prominent group of that type who believe the sacred name should never be spoken are non-Messianic Jews, and even Messianic Jews who still believe that that practice of using a circumlocution should always be used. I currently kind of follow a Messianic Jewish congregation in the Haifa area of Israel. It's called Mount Carmel Assembly. It is thoroughly Jewish, but you know, many of the members of that Kehillah, that church or that assembly, are not only Jewish believers in Yeshua, but also Arab, former Muslim believers in Yeshua, a lot of Jews who have migrated from other countries, made Aliyah, come to Israel. And you also have Gentile Christians who have joined that community. And that community always uses a circumlocution. They always use Adonai. I have never heard them speak the name of Yahweh. And I think the reason they take that position is either because that's the way they think it should be done, or to avoid offending Jewish people who, even as believers in Yeshua, believe it should not be done. So let your conscience be your guide. Pray to God about it. Ask him if he would have you, particularly in your private devotions, your private time with God. Seek his will if you believe that he is leading you to use and pronounce the sacred name. Then I think we've given you enough information here that you can do it with a clear conscience and certainly be blessed by the use of that name. There is one place in the Old Testament which is known as the Aaronic blessing, or the blessing that God gave for Aaron, the first high priest, and his descendants and his tribe, the priests and the Levites, to use when they blessed the people of God. It's from Numbers chapter 6. I forget which verse it is, but it'll be very familiar to you when we give it in English. I'll also pronounce it in Hebrew, and I will utilize the sacred name. I'll pronounce the sacred name in giving that blessing, because I believe the instructions that precede that blessing is God telling the priests, the ones who give that blessing, to place the name of God upon the people, and that placing of his name on them by the spoken word will be a blessing to them. So if you're going to use circumlocutions everywhere else, I would say that when this blessing is pronounced, it probably should use the sacred name. So let me give you that blessing now in Hebrew, and then we'll follow it up with an English translation. Yivarechecha Yahweh vayishmarecha, Ya'er Yahweh panav elecha vayuchanecha, Isa Yahweh panav elecha vayasem lecha shalom. In English, I will use the common circumlocution that is used in our English texts for this, and the blessing is as follows. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. I wish you God's blessing, and thanks for tuning into this video.